All right, so today we're going to talk about Vietnam. This is a long PowerPoint, so I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as we can. It's the longest war in U.S. history until Afghanistan in 2002. More than 58,000 troops die in this thing, 300,000 are wounded, 14,000 are disabled, 800,000 Vietnam veterans diagnosed with having significant to severe problems in readjustment, or what we'd call today PTSD. So the overview, as you see, in Vietnam, over 2 million people died. In Vietnam, 4 million people were wounded and 10 million were displaced from their homes. 2 out of 3 Americans judged the Vietnam War as to have been a mistake. Over 50% did not have a clear idea of what the war was about, and 1/3 didn't even remember which side we supported. 50% of Americans didn't even know where Vietnam was located. This is a different war because we have television that continues to evolve, and everyone has a television by the 60s, and the nightly news at 6:30 rolls out, and they show very graphic footage of combat. And so this is the first war in which television plays a major role. Remember, World War II was they got news through the movie theaters, they got news in newsreels, things like that, and they could be older, 2-3 weeks old. This footage, this war, people would get it instantaneously. You know, the night after it happened or day after it happened. So 70% or 76% of men sent to Vietnam were from lower to middle class families. The average age of a soldier in Vietnam was 19, World War II, 25. Most soldiers were drafted, few were enlisted. In other words, we didn't have a lot of volunteers. Soldiers serve a tour of duty, which is roughly about a year. Soldiers did not return home at the same time. Usually they returned by themselves. 7 presidents made decisions concerning Vietnam. Music clearly proved how divided people were in the United States over this issue. So let's go through some background of the war. Vietnam was a French colony that was invaded by Japan during World War II. Ho Chi Minh was the leader of the Vietnamese called Viet Minh. Ho Chi Minh supported communism. The reason was because he went to President Wilson in 1919 at the Versailles Peace Conference, and he asked for U.S. help, and we refused because we would be going against our ally France. So guess what? Stalin and the Soviets, they were open. They supported him, so he became a communist. In 1945, the French returned to control Vietnam after the Japanese had run them out. Ho Chi Minh controlled North Vietnam and he was sent aid by China. France was, of course, sent aid by the U.S. 1950, President Truman sent $15 million to France to help fight with the war. The United States is paying 75 to 80% of France's military costs. From 1950 to 1954, we spent $2.6 billion in Vietnam. So here's some reasons why we get involved. Containment. Our policy of resisting further expansion of communism around the world. And you have the domino theory that President Eisenhower lays out. And you need to know the domino theory, which basically says that if one country in a region falls to communism, the neighboring countries would fall. And in his domino speech, you'll see he's very concerned with all of these Asiatic countries falling to communism and leaving Japan by itself. And we spent a lot of money, time, and effort in Japan democratizing them, and we did not want to see them fall to communism at all. There is Vietnam. French trouble in 1954, Operation Vulture. France wants the U.S. to use the atomic bomb. Eisenhower said no. 1954 at Bien Diem Phu, the French hold an area for 50 days, and then it falls to Ho Chi Minh and his troops. This is a major turning point because France leaves Vietnam in defeat. So we have a divided Vietnam in 1954. The Geneva Accords splits Vietnam on the 17th parallel. You need to know that. North Vietnam would be in control of, would be Ho Chi Minh and the communist control, and South Vietnam would be the democracy, and they're looking for a leader. Roots of American involvement go back to 1945. Colonel Peter Dewey served as an officer in strategic services. He's shot and killed by one of the Viet Minh in 1945, right at the end of World War II. Dewey is officially the first American killed in the Vietnam War. So you have two leaders of Vietnam. You have Ho Chi Minh, he's the leader of the North, but also many people in South Vietnam look up to him for leadership. He's a hero because he broke up large estates and redistributed them to peasants and gave land to peasants, kind of evened the playing field there for him a little bit for the poor. He had also been at war with the French, and he beat the French. So the South chooses this guy, Ngo Diem, and he's placed into office by the United States. He was told to hold free elections. We later learned he refused. He run a corrupt government that suppresses opposition of any kind, so it's not a true democracy. And he offers little or no land distribution to peasants, so the poor is just going to be poor. So he's also a Catholic. Most people wanted to follow Buddhism. Vietnam to this day is a Buddhist nation, or they have a lot of Buddhist traditions there. He will restrict Buddhist practices across South Vietnam. In 1957, the Viet Cong, also called the VC by the Americans, they are guerrilla fighters. They're guerrilla units, and they wanted Diem out of South Vietnam. They did not like him. Ho Chi Minh will use the Ho Chi Minh Trail as a network of paths and passages by North Vietnam to transport supplies into the Viet Cong areas. And if you look at this map, you'll see it goes all through South Vietnam. And it's a lot more extensive than this map, by the way. So we get a new president in 1960, JFK in Vietnam. He called Vietnam the cornerstone of the free world. September 1963, though, he says in an interview, we must rethink Vietnam. That's his last interview before he's assassinated, and this is the last public forum he will give on it. And this is a what if of history. If he lives, if JFK lives, because he's assassinated a month later, does he pull us out of Vietnam? Keep in mind, he sends over 16,000 military advisors. So he sends over more troops than any other president at this time. So, but in his last interview, he says we must rethink Vietnam. It is a revolutionary movement, and he's starting to see this. And we're not going to win. So, General Taylor and Vice President Johnson go on a fact-finding mission. They recommend sending 8,000 more combat troops, and JFK will send these advisors to help the South Vietnam government. And if you watch this interview down at the bottom, you'll see him talk about it from 1253 on. So trouble for the Diem government. In protest to Diem's government in South Vietnam, Buddhist monks, they're peaceful people. They set themselves on fire in the middle of the streets in Saigon and throughout South Vietnam to protest his government. And as you see in the picture there, they don't live. They burn themselves to death. The VC in South Vietnam gaining support from, or is gaining support in South Vietnam to fight the Diem government. The U.S. will call for a military coup to take over the South Vietnam government, to take it over from Diem. On November 1st, 1963, Diem will be executed. Much to the chagrin of JFK, he did not want him assassinated. We just wanted him, or executed. We wanted him removed from government. But they took it another step further and they executed him. So General William Westmoreland, he's the overall commander in Vietnam. He will be placed this task until late 1968, I believe. So Lyndon Baines Johnson becomes the president after JFK. He will escalate U.S. involvement in this war. And Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, who also served as Secretary of Defense under Kennedy, recommends that we send more troops over. In August 1964, we have the Gulf of Tonkin incident. This is the USS Maddox was attacked by a North Vietnamese torpedo boat. 2 days later, a ship, the C. Turner Joy, is supposedly attacked as well. So President Johnson asked Congress to act on this, and he asked for what is going to be called a blank check so he can handle this problem. If you look here, this blank check says he can do whatever he needs to do to step in to repel these attacks. A little bit about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. It didn't happen. We made it up. There was no torpedo boat. There's no evidence that anything happened out there. It's just accounts by sailors, and we know that government officials changed the wording a little bit. So this just gave us a reason and an excuse to step into Vietnam, and this was very shady, but we do things like this. So if you pay attention, we've done things like this since. So, weapons of mass destruction. But 1965, the VC attacked advisors near Pleiku, and they killed 8 Americans. In 1965, Operation Flaming Darts we used B-52 bombers to bomb North Vietnam. Operation Rolling Thunder will be the first major operation we have in Vietnam where we are in the lead. We're not advisors. Our troops will fight the North Vietnamese. The main target, of course, is the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So as you see, 1965, look at the escalation, 200,000 troops in Vietnam. Look at 1967, Cedar Falls, Operation Cedar Falls. We attack VC headquarters in what is known as the Iron Triangle, and we level it to the ground. Troops uncover massive tunnel networks used as a base for guerrilla raids. We start to enlist tunnel rats. These are men responsible for going into the tunnels to flush out the Viet Cong. So think about this. These men volunteer for this service, and they go in literally with a pistol and a flashlight. So they open the hatch that these people in the tunnels can see our American soldiers going in with a flashlight and a gun. So a lot of them are killed, but some of them are very successful. Here is Tunnel Rat. I do want to mention that this tunnel network goes throughout all of North and South Vietnam along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It spreads out, and it's a lot more vast than we even knew. So we can bomb these guys, and we will bomb these guys into oblivion, but it doesn't matter. They've got tunnels under the earth, and they are they will be safe, and they can come and fight another day. Turning point in this war is the Tet Offensive. Make sure you know this. Our statement from the president was our soldiers will be home by Christmas of 1968. New Year's, as you see, 70,000, and it's January 31st. Tet is the Vietnamese New Year. It's a lunar New Year. They base it off the moon. 70,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong attack cities in South Vietnam is the boldest move. As you see, 19 VC attacked the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, killed 5 American soldiers. Clearly, it does not look like these North Vietnamese are on the run like our government was telling us and our president was telling us. And Americans lose heart, and we actually win this battle. The Americans actually come back and we win this battle. We put it down. But the American attitude back home drastically shifts, and this was the turning point because Americans will start to want us out of this war.